And we're live.
Good morning, everyone. We've got a fairly aggressive agenda, so we'll get right to business. If you could take a roll call, please, Mr. Rutter.
Sure. Warden Danielson.
I'm present.
Councillor Moffat.
Present.
Councillor Roberts.
Present.
Councillor Kennedy.
Present.
Councillor Burton.
Present.
Councillor Ryle.
Present.
Councillor DeVolen.
Present.
And Councillor Shell.
Present.
Thank you.
Could I have a mover and a seconder to adopt the agenda for today? Councillors Roberts and Shell. Thank you.
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Shell. Be it resolved that the January 26, 2022 Haliburton County Council agenda be approved.
All in favor? That's carried. Is there any notice of pecuniary interest or general nature thereof this morning? Hearing none, could I have a mover and a seconder to adopt the minutes of December the 14th and 15th? Councillors Burton and Ryle.
Moved by Councillor Burton, seconded by Councillor Ryle. Be it resolved that the minutes from the December 14th, 2021 inaugural session of County Council and the December 15th, 2021 regular meeting of County Council be adopted as circulated.
All in favor? That's carried. We have no business arising from the previous meeting, so we'll move right into delegations. And we are pleased to welcome Dr. Bocking, who's here to give us an update on the HKPR health unit. I believe she may be accompanied by Richard Ocharovich, but I don't see him here yet. Good morning, Dr. Bocking, and welcome.
Good morning. Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you for allowing me to join this morning. It's a pleasure to be here and meet you all virtually for the first time, and a belated Happy New Year's.
And to you, we've been looking forward to hearing your update. So good morning, Richard. So we will turn the floor over to you to hear your update.
Wonderful, thank you. And let me just double check with the admin there whether or not I will be projecting the slides or whether or not you will be doing that, and I can just indicate when to move ahead.
We'll be doing it and you can just let us know.
Okay, all right. Well, good morning, everyone. Again, it's unfortunate that I haven't had the opportunity to meet all of you in person as of yet. I think, as you know, I joined the health unit in April, just in time for the peak of the third wave of the pandemic. And it really has been a sprint since then. So I think there's many things that I would have done had we not been mid-pandemic, but I find myself having kind of altered some of my initial approaches just in the circumstances we find ourselves in. But I'm very pleased to be able to give you this update and happy to join and provide updates at any time. So please don't hesitate to reach out. So if you go to the next slide, please. So a quick outline. I know I don't have a lot of time. I'll touch very briefly on kind of functions of public health, what services we have continued to provide throughout the pandemic, what services have been slowed, and then which services have been offline. I'll provide some updates on COVID, as I know that's still a hot topic. A quick comment on our budget financial outlook, and then really forward-looking next steps, recovery, and a couple comments just about public health modernization. So next slide, please. I think a lot of people have difficulty distinguishing the difference between public health and our healthcare system and the acute care sector and what it is that public health does. I think certainly a pandemic has thrust public health into the spotlight, but there's many initiatives and services that we're involved in outside of infectious disease control and our pandemic response. These are really the core functions of public health. health. And underlying all of that is, as opposed to kind of clinical care, acute health care, which is very individual focused, clinical focused, public health is focused at a community level or population level. And that's one of the most important distinguishing features. I think the other really is the focus on prevention. Yes, I think in healthcare, we see individual one-on-one counseling related to prevention, but we look in public health at much more upstream approaches that will impact communities as a whole, as well as those community members that might be most marginalized or vulnerable. Next slide, please. Really underlying all of our services and initiatives, we root our initiatives in public health evidence and data, as well as health equity. And so we try to ensure that our services are informed by the most recent data, as well as an approach to health equity. And we have a continuous quality improvement program where we continue to look at evidence as it emerges and how we should be adapting. And certainly the pandemic, I think, has highlighted the need to continually pivot and learn from emerging evidence and data. So next slide, please. So you're likely familiar with the Ontario Public Health Standards. And in Ontario, we have provincial legislation, which really defines the formation of boards of health and health units. Through that, it lists really the mandatory minimum programs and services that health units and boards of health must provide. And then the Ontario Public Health Standards go into more detail about those minimum standards. The standards are accompanied by protocols and guideline documents for which health units have to follow for each of our core areas. The next 5 slides really outline which services we've continued throughout the pandemic. And I won't read through them line by line, as there are a number of services that have continued. A lot of these services are services that, should they have come completely offline, would have put the public at risk. The majority of our environmental health programs have continued throughout, and inspections have continued throughout all regions of the health unit. I know in Haliburton, there's quite a number of premises. There's over 230 food premises that our inspectors follow up with annually. Certainly, we know that a destination area in the summer with recreational beaches and summer camps and other premises that our team continues and has continued to follow up with throughout the pandemic. In addition, a large number of small drinking water systems, and overall, we continue to respond to any complaints that we receive or notifications related to health hazards. And next slide, please. In terms of infectious diseases, I think some people may or may not be surprised that we continue to see other infectious diseases that are not COVID. And there's a long list of those that are reportable and we continue to respond to. And again, that's a critical function of public health to be able to do case and contact and outbreak management associated with any of the reportable diseases that we have. We've also continued to respond to infection control complaints and continued other critical services related to harm reduction, including prevention of other bloodborne infections, and then vector-borne disease surveillance, including Lyme disease, so tick trapping and mosquito trapping for West Nile virus. And next slide, please. So again, immunization services other than COVID had been offline, but we have continued some throughout. So certainly the provision of vaccines to all of our primary care providers comes through the health unit for our routine childhood series. We've continued to follow up on adverse events following immunization, and that's for all immunizations. That's a system that's in place for all immunizations. Our Healthy Families team, while having to pivot at various times to move away from in-home visiting to virtual visiting, has also continued and maintained a number of other services and started some new initiatives in trying to reach pregnant women and young families in new ways throughout the pandemic. Next slide, please. I spoke briefly related to harm reduction before. Our tobacco control officers have, for the most part, continued to inspect throughout the pandemic. Our Healthy Schools program has continued, but really has been primarily focused on COVID response. So other initiatives that had occurred to support schools, such as oral health services, nutrition programming, have largely been offline. With most of our focus again on COVID-19 infection prevention and control. And next slide, please. We continue with a number of our surveillance initiatives, especially related to infectious disease surveillance and reporting. And we also made some significant progress related to reporting on opioid overdoses and harms associated with substance use. We do have a new dashboard on our website that reports on opioid overdoses and presentations to the emergency department. That was developed in collaboration with a number of community partners and is used as a tool by community partners and ourselves in order to respond to any changes in those trends. Next slide, please. A quick note about some services that in the fall had been brought back online. So our school-based immunization program had stopped in 2020 and in the spring, did not happen in the spring of 2021 due to COVID-19. We did resume the school-based immunization program this past fall in that lull in between waves of COVID-19. And it's our intent to continue with the second part of that in this coming May. In addition, our sexual health clinics had resumed at 50% capacity in the fall. They have been put offline again in response to the Omicron wave, but we are intending to resume them again until the beginning of April. And then there's some other in-office services that have resumed partially, but again, the Omicron wave for a couple of months now, they're offline, but they'll be back end of March, beginning of April. And next slide, please. Some additional services that we have been attempting to restart and resume, and I think really we'll be looking into March and April to determine when they come back online. Oral health is still a big question mark at this point in time in terms of the oral health services that we provided through schools. So this is largely screening and prevention services, and we've not had any indication as yet from the ministry as to direction in terms of resuming this service. And next slide. So there are some services that are remaining completely offline. A lot of these are any of our in-person training opportunities, whether it's food handler training, as in addition to broader public awareness campaigns and other policy development that have remained offline. And as the majority of those individuals have been redeployed to support COVID-19 pandemic response. And next slide, please. And I spoke already to oral health. So I'll go to the next slide, please, and start in with some updates related to COVID-19. So the health unit, I think we've quoted different numbers. Certainly at the height of each of the waves, I would estimate that at least 80% of our resources have been dedicated to pandemic response. So vast majority of our employees and staff redeployed to support COVID response. And the two main arms of that response have been kind of COVID containment, which is case and contact outbreak management, and then the other arm being COVID-19 vaccination. Behind that, we continue with supports related to disease surveillance, enforcement, and communication and public education. Next slide, please. So this is a graph of our incidence rate for all of HKPR. It would be mimicked, the Haliburton specific one would mimic these same curves. If we look back to the beginning of 2020 and that first wave, and we compare that now to the wave we've seen with Omicron and realize what a difference we thought wave 3 was a lot of activity, and then we look at wave 4 or what we're experiencing now with Omicron and the significance of that peak there. So Halliburton has certainly experienced COVID-19 activity, definitely in comparison to City of Kawartha Lakes and Northumberland County, not as much activity, but on a per capita basis, it's proportionate. So Halliburton has experienced, in addition, some outbreaks. There have been 5 admissions to hospital among residents from Halliburton County and one death from a resident of Halliburton County. So while Halliburton is more remote than other areas of the province, it certainly has not, I think, escaped the impact certainly of COVID-19. This graph is not, that the peak you see on the far right-hand side of the graph is not reflective of the actual COVID-19 activity anymore, because this only reflects those cases that are confirmed with laboratory testing by PCR testing. So we can assume that peak is actually much higher in terms of actual COVID-19 infections. So next slide, please. I wanted to speak very briefly about the Omicron variant because it really has required a fundamental shift in the way that both public health is having to think about our response to COVID-19, as well as how the public is having to think about our response to COVID-19. I've highlighted here 5 key areas where we have had to change our approach. So for example, surveillance, we know that our numbers for cases is no longer accurate. So we're having to look at other indicators to tell us when we might be peaking, when we're plateauing, when we need to be concerned. When Omicron emerged and we realized how transmissible and infectious it was, there needed to be a drastic change in the testing landscape as the system no longer had capacity to offer PCR testing for everybody. So while in November we were telling people if you have a positive rapid antigen test, you should have it confirmed by PCR, we've stopped saying that because most people don't have access to PCR. If people do test positive on a rapid antigen test, then we assume that is a positive test. It doesn't need to be confirmed. And then there's many people that might not have access to a rapid antigen test. And so if people have symptoms consistent with COVID-19, the message is assume that you have COVID-19 and follow the isolation guidance associated with that. We've had some fundamental changes in how we approach case contact and outbreak management. And that, again, that is rooted in features of the Omicron variant. So the fact that it is so much more infectious, we cannot possibly contact every individual with a positive test, especially if you included rapid antigen tests, and do the contact tracing associated with that. So we now rely on individuals to identify their symptoms and to notify people that they may have been in contact with about that and to follow isolation guidance. I think we're not naive in thinking that 100% of the public is going to follow that, but I don't think we have an alternative. I think as we shift towards an endemic state and approaching COVID-19, as we do other respiratory viruses, some of the measures we were taking before have to be altered because they're just not sustainable. We have provided some interim guidance for long-term care homes and retirement homes as we enter really the third year of the pandemic, acknowledging the harmful impacts of some of the outbreak measures that have needed to be in place in long-term care homes and the negative impacts on mental, physical, emotional health of seniors that are in homes, and balancing that against the risk of COVID-19. We know that Omicron variant is not always a common cold. We do have one home that has experienced 3 deaths specific to COVID-19 just in the Omicron wave. So we can't ignore that it's here. But how do we balance that against isolation and prolonged periods of isolation and the needs of residents? And then a similar fundamental shift when we think about schools and childcare. And I think this in particular has been the most challenging aspect for the public and communities to wrap their heads around, as cases associated with schools or among school-age children and staff are no longer reportable to public health. We're not investigating cases associated with it. Schools are reporting to the Ministry of Education and to public health broader measures such as absenteeism, but we certainly are not taking the same approach as before. And that decision, I think, is rooted in data. Certainly for our region, those schools that we declared outbreaks of COVID-19 in, the majority were 2 to 3 cases, were not widespread activity in schools. And those schools that we did see more activity were mostly related to outside school activities, whether it be hockey games or tournaments, or whether it be other activities outside of school. So we certainly saw in our region that activity in schools was really a reflection of what was happening in the community, and schools were not accelerating COVID-19 transmission and then taking it out into the community. So next slide, please. So a very quick comment just related to our budget. So the Board of Health approved our 2022 budget in September of this year. We had moved it up earlier to align more with municipal budgeting timelines to ensure we shared information with our key obligated municipalities. Our proposed budget did include our projections for ongoing COVID-19 response as well as recovery costs. We continue to be surprised by COVID-19 and what it continues to bring, and then directions from the ministry. So I think we've had to try and have multiple contingency plans. We have received confirmation that we will be receiving ongoing, at least 2022 mitigation funding from the province to help balance the shift to a higher levy to municipalities that had been approached by the province previously. And so with that consideration, we were able to decrease what we had projected was going to be a 10% increase to obligated municipalities down to 5%. So I've included here what the total levy for Haliburton County is for 2022, as well as what the increase was for 2022. And next slide, please. We certainly have an ongoing commitment to mitigating expenses wherever we can, and have had some recent thorough reviews, many of which started before the pandemic, but have been maintained throughout the pandemic in terms of how we can ensure that we are maximizing partnerships, finding efficiencies, streamlining services, so that money really is being spent to support our core programs and services to benefit residents. And next slide, please. So looking ahead, I guess to speak very briefly about public health modernization. So this was a hot topic prior to the pandemic. The provincial government had started an initiative and a consultation process related to public health modernization, which would have seen the decrease in number of health units. At the time it was 35 down to 10 regional entities. There was a fair amount of concern expressed from not just, I think, the public health field, but also municipalities associated with what that might mean for really the face of public health and its key strengths that really are rooted in community partnerships and municipalities. The discussion related to modernization really has been on pause with the pandemic. We know that there's a provincial election this year. I think we will not see that conversation resume, certainly I think before the election, just because of the influence and impact of the pandemic. And really, I think what is key, if there's any look again related to governance of public health, any movement needs to be rooted in a review of pandemic response and the lessons learned from how our public health system was able to respond to the pandemic, so that any changes really are evidence-based and looking at how we actually performed, learning from that and changing as needed with that. Every time we start to get to a point where we think we're talking about recovery, we have another wave or we have another variant. We do have a recovery framework that we've adopted at the health unit that continues to, we maintain a thread is what we call it, but then people have to be redeployed depending on the surge in activity. I think for us, the key things related to recovery when we're thinking about planning is that COVID-19 really is not going anywhere. And so planning to how we integrate our response throughout all future activities. So if it will continue to be, say, a reportable disease, but we can't continue to dedicate 80% of health unit resources to that response. So how do we look at what the long-term sustainable picture will be? They're similar to the acute care sector. We have areas that will need significant catch-up dedication. So areas that, a huge cohort of children that have not had preventative oral health screening. We know that some childhood immunizations are behind. We know that our school-based immunization program, we're attempting to catch up, but it's going to take several years really to catch up in some of these areas that had to go offline in response, and we're now catching up. And I equate that to our surgical backlog, right? So the acute care sector has its catch-up activities, and public health will as well. And then the other key when we're thinking about recovery is how we're going to respond to those burdens of illness that have been exacerbated throughout the pandemic. And I think one of the things we highlight is the opioid overdose death pandemic that really has been at the parallel to throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. It existed before COVID-19, but very clear data that it has worsened throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. So as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic, highlighting those health issues and community health issues, which have been exacerbated throughout COVID-19, and determine how we are going to be able to focus on those and what resources we need to respond and support communities to start to address those. So a few things on our mind as we look to the future. Certainly in the immediate future, we're looking at trying to see the other side of this Omicron wave and then get to the spring where we can start to focus on a few additional initiatives. So I'll end there. I'm happy to take any questions. I'm sure I won't have covered everything. But again, I do encourage you, if you have questions for the health unit, to reach out at any time. And we're happy to, if we don't know the answer, and we won't know the answer to everything, certainly find out for you or figure out where we can get it.
Thank you so much for this update, Dr. Bucking. It's it's been a while coming, but being here is much appreciated. And I recognize that you're responsible for offering a huge spectrum of services within your region, and that with the almost insurmountable challenge of COVID, it's just complicated your lives. Before I go to questions, I'd just like to say that we truly appreciate the input that we've had and working with Richard. He's been very helpful to the county's EOC and kept us fully informed. So we really appreciate that. With that, I would go to council for questions or comments. Councillor Roberts.
Yeah, just a comment. Thank you so much, Dr. Bucking, for coming. I had the pleasure of meeting you in person when that was still allowed. And when you did come up to Halliburton, we had a really nice lunch at McCags and said, what do you think the county would be interested in hearing? And you really covered a lot in the time frame that you did. So thank you so much. I've been on the Board of Health now for several years. And, I believe it was about the February meeting before it was called a pandemic. We heard this little rumbling and we knew stuff was happening in the world and we were all kind of oblivious. So the Board of Health has been dealing with this, or the health unit, pardon me, this 2 years. And I'm just so impressed with how the staff have had to, I hate that word, but pivot and change and adapt. And dietitians are doing contact tracing, and everybody has been doing what they can. And it's and they usually do it with a happy heart. We've actually had the opportunity where we were in our district was not in such a dire area, and so we were able to deploy people to Southern Ontario health units to do some of that calling. So all health units are trying to help each other and trying to adapt. Just want to point out too, we did have funding from the province. I'm not sure if I brought this forward to the county for COVID. Sort of like we got Safe Restart. Well, the health unit got 2 different installments of COVID funding where we'd be dipping into our savings and more if that hadn't happened. So we're grateful for the province to help out. As well, Dr. Bocking, a little bit you referenced at the end too, in terms of the change and that was happening with the last incoming of this provincial government that's in place that wanted to do a restructuring of the health unit. So our health unit also just has approved at our last meeting last week to write a letter to the province requesting that. So not only, there's a lot of health units that are saying just wait till the pandemic is over and be sure to review how local health units were able to respond with this. So thank you.
Thank you. Comments or questions? Councillor Real.
I realize it may be really early, but we're hearing now that there is a new confirmed Omicron 2 variant that's out there. And it only just came out recently. Is there anything you can share with us, or is it just too early for that?
I think it's too early. At this, what I've heard it is potentially more infectious or transmissible than the original Omicron variant. But I think there's some key things that we don't know, such as the risk of reinfection. So a large proportion of the population is going to have good immunity from vaccination and from having experienced the infection themselves. So we don't know yet what the risk of reinfection will be, how well our vaccines are working against this new variant. So I think a lot that we don't know related to what the impact is going to be.
Thank you very much for that.
Other questions or comments for Dr. Bocking? Only one comment that I would like to make. I'm sure you're aware of the fact that that many municipalities are concerned about the formation of the new Ontario health teams and whether municipalities would have a voice or a seat on those boards. And with the ever increasing contribution to health from municipalities, I think that's becoming a stronger wish, and it's certainly the desire of Haliburton County to be involved in governance if there's a possibility there, and any support or that you can give us or guidance would certainly be appreciated going forward.
Certainly, and I think just to share that I strongly support really an integrated system and an understanding of roles, responsibilities, and how each of the pieces fit together. And I think that for public health has been a bit sidelined for a long time, and it's not that we're overlapping, but it's an understanding really of how we fit in the picture. And so we are working with the Ontario Health Team of Northumberland as well as City of Kawartha Lakes, and I think certainly want to be able to support Ontario health teams, but also municipalities kind of navigate that, at least from a public health lens. So I think happy to support in ways that we're able to.
That's good. It's great to hear. Any other comments or concerns that you'd wish to raise? Well, we can't thank you enough. I mean, we know how busy you are, how stretched your resources are, and for you to give us some time today is truly appreciated.
It's a pleasure, and I'd like to spend more time in person in Haliburton County, and not just in the summertime, but winter as well. So when things calm down, I'll be up more in person.
Well, we look forward to that when things, and hopefully things will calm down reasonably soon. Okay, with that, I would look for a mover and a seconder to receive Dr. Bocking's report. Councillors DeVolen and Roberts, thank you.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Roberts. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council receives for information the January 26, 2022 delegation from Dr. Bocking of the Haliburton Kawartha Pine Ridge District Health Unit.
All in favor? That's carried. Well, next up, we have an overview of the work plan for the short-term rental review. And I believe that we have Mr. Farragon joining us today.
Very good morning, Warden Danielson and members of council. Sorry for that delay while I got myself turned on and my microphone turned on. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you very much. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with County Council this morning and to have the opportunity to speak with you about the work that you've retained us to assist with. And that's, of course, is looking at the possibility of creating a framework to guide the use of short-term rental accommodation properties within Haliburton County. But before I jump into the presentation, Madam Warden, I just want to confirm that my colleagues are also on the line. I'm joined today by two of Jail Richard's very talented planners, Simran Sani, as well as Tori Ruck. So I just wanted to make sure that they're also have been promoted to panelists. I can't quite see the entire screen.
They are here and welcome to you both.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you for that. So as I sort of said, we're very happy to be here, and on behalf of our organization, we wanted to thank you for selecting us to assist you with this assignment. It is a truly exciting, I think, opportunity and a complex issue, one that many municipalities, not only across Ontario, Canada, but across the world are sort of looking at as the popularity of kind of home sharing or short-term rentals has sort of seemed to really have taken off. So we did bring a brief presentation, which is intended to sort of guide our discussion this morning. And of course, Mike has brought that up. Thank you very much, Mike. If we could go to the first slide, please. So if Warden Danielson, if it pleases Council, what we were hoping to do today in this first discussion is just, as Mr. Stone has outlined in his report, is to sort of talk, firstly, set some context around the issue of short-term rental accommodations, touch on the objectives of this particular mandate that you have asked us to assist with. Of course, we'd like to have an opportunity to introduce County Council formally to the project team, including Gersimran and Tori, look very briefly at our work plan. And then importantly, we're hoping to hear some feedback from County Council on this issue. We've done some preliminary research, obviously, in anticipation of this meeting and our earlier proposal to the county. And this is something that has been being considered for some time at the lower tier level within the county, has recently been elevated to the county level. And we're curious to hear some preliminary feedback from County Council members on this issue as we sort of get in to the next first stages of our study to ensure that we're sort of clear on County Council's expectations and being able to meet those. So if that is okay with you, Madam Warden, I can sort of continue to proceed with the balance of the presentation.
Absolutely. We look forward to hearing it. So go ahead.
Okay, Mike, if we can go down to the next slide, please. So as I sort of mentioned, not surprisingly, I would sort of say Haliburton County has a thriving short-term rental accommodation industry, and we've covered off some of the reasons why that is the case in our covering memo to County Council that's on the agenda this morning. And when you step back and you think about the notion of short-term rental accommodations, and you look at the experience not only in Haliburton, so looking at some of the work that Minden Hills has done as an example, I think it was in 2018. And if you look at some of the other perspectives and experiences of other municipalities in Ontario, home sharing is on the rise, and typically the perspectives around home sharing can be quite varied. And what this graphic or illustration on this slide is attempting to represent is often the varied perspectives on home sharing that other municipalities have experienced, and Haliburton County has experienced as well. So on the one hand, as we've described in our report, there's a concern that unregulated home sharing opportunities in a community can work against the municipality's goals of trying to create affordable and attainable housing. So the idea there is that as housing is taken out of the supply, it provides puts upward pressure on sort of housing prices, creating affordability concerns for residents, individuals looking to either own or rent in the community. The flip side to that is short-term rentals are seen in some communities as being a benefit to tourism, especially communities that are rural in nature and don't have a lot of sort of hotel or motel stock. The short-term rental accommodations are seen as a way of kind of filling in that accommodation gap, if you will, and allowing new individuals to come to the community, to experience the community, and to fall in love with the community, and eventually, perhaps even take up residence in the community at some point in time in the future. There's definitely concerns around what we're sort of describing on this slide as quality of life. So if you're thinking about nuisance complaints and those sorts of things, that's where public safety, that's where those buckets of concerns lie, is underneath the quality of life considerations. There's definitely in communities where there is very healthy sort of hotel and motel and bed and breakfast stock, the owners of those establishments, quite rightly, are looking to bring consistency to the regulatory framework between them and the short-term rental accommodation providers, which is sort of reasonable in terms of creating, I think, a level playing field. There's a question around economic opportunities. So, most folks see home sharing as an opportunity to generate extra income, which is a good thing, if they're looking to sort of service either their mortgage debt or to apply that to some form of discretionary spending. And then I think there's a bucket of questions and considerations that go under the sort of banner of regulations, if you will. And really the sort of question there is, how does the short-term rental accommodation opportunities relate to the existing regulatory framework within your municipality? So your official plans, your zoning bylaws, the Ontario Building Code, the Fire Code, noise bylaws, property standard bylaws, all of those types of things. And there's some really interesting stuff that's coming out of some other communities in terms of how to best regulate those sort of short-term rental accommodation opportunities. So if we could move to the next slide, Mike. So, and as I sort of mentioned, I've taken the screenshot from the Highlander putting this presentation together, and this was on the cover of the newspaper back in 2019 when Highlands East Council was talking about looking at the possibility of short-term rental rules. So clearly something I think that councils, the issues are council is aware of those issues, and they have been examined at the sort of the local level. So Haliburton County is, I think, no different and is having a similar experience than other communities across the province. So we can move to the next slide, Mike, please. So that's the context. So really why we're here is to help the county go through a very sort of systematic examination of the issue. So I think, the objectives of the study are for us is to go and to look at all of the sort of scientific literature, if you will, that is out there that relates to short-term rental accommodations. We'll be looking at sort of the context for short-term rental accommodations in Ontario and elsewhere, looking at successful municipal practices, and we'll be engaging the community and councils in this discussion as well to ensure that we're providing county council with the best informed recommendations that we can at the end of this process in terms of a framework to regulate the use of short-term rental accommodation provisions within the county. So what this slide illustrates is our project team. So of course the team, we have our JLR representatives, which is listed at the bottom. Mr. Stone is the project manager for this assignment, and obviously County Council is a big part of that team, of our team. So that's why we have the county listed at the top. Now, we haven't listed, of course, the lower tier municipalities. They are a key partner here as well. Other public agencies are a key collaborator within this process, as are members of the public and stakeholders. And in our memo to County Council that you have on your agenda this morning, we've described some of the preliminary stakeholder mapping exercise that we have done, and we've tentatively identified some stakeholders that we see ourselves consulting with and hoping to get some feedback from County Council on that when we get to the discussion stage. But Warden Danielson, I'll pause here and I'll give my colleagues Gersimran and Tori an opportunity to introduce themselves to County Council as well.
Go ahead. Gersimran?
Yep. Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning. I am Gersimran and I'm a planner with JLR. I will serve as a planner on file for this project, and my role will focus on the research and best practice review aspects of the project. And yeah, I'm looking forward to getting started on this.
As do we. And Tori, go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Tori Ruck, and I'm a planner with JLR as well. For this project, I'm going to work on the consultation aspect, so working with different municipalities and different stakeholder groups, and looking forward to doing that work for you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, Gersimran and Tori, and Warden Danielson. I can't help but comment. So Tori's a planner in JLR's Kingston office, and Gersimran is a planner in our Guelph office. And of course, I'm dialing in from British Columbia this morning. So through the magic of technology, I think we have this assignment covered from coast to coast, if you will. But I'll move to the next slide if I could, Mike, please. So the memo that we have in the agenda package this morning describes our work plan, and what this slide does is sort of provides a graphic illustration of the work that we have ahead of us over the next several months. So the work plan consists of 3 major phases. We're currently in phase 1, which is the startup phase. So we're collecting some preliminary research and wanting to check in with sort of county council. That startup phase will sort of end next month, and then from there we will go into the second most substantive phase of the assignment, which we're describing as the understanding and the direction phase. That will take us from February into May. And then in May, we anticipate entering into the third and final phase of the assignment, where we get into implementation, and we foresee that phase continuing into June. So the major steps are on the left. What we've done on the right-hand slide of this screen is attempt to illustrate moments of engagement, both with county council and members of the public and stakeholders. So we do anticipate having several discussions with county council on the subject over the next 5 or 6 months. I think 5 meetings in total. So this is our first opportunity to sort of have the discussion, and there'll be several more, which we're very much looking forward to. And then in phase 2, we do plan on consulting with the public through 2 rounds of consultation. And very similar to other projects that we've done and other projects that the county has done, the first round of consultation with the community will really be designed to sort of gather the various perspectives on this issue. And then we're going to take those perspectives away, and we're going to come up with recommendations for the short-term rental accommodation framework within Haliburton County. And after we've received some feedback from administration and county council, we intend to go out and consult with the community again to get their views on the framework and bring those perspectives back to county council in the 5th and final meeting that we currently anticipate in June. So county council has the ability to understand residents' perspectives on the issue as it's sort of making its choices and its decisions around the new framework to guide short-term rental accommodations within the county. So Mike, if we can go to the next slide, please. So with that, Madam Warden, that is the overview, both of the work plan and our engagement strategy. I would sort of echo Tori and Gersimran's sentiments. We very much look forward to getting going on this assignment and to helping you in the best way that we can. And we're happy to take any questions or receive any feedback from County Council. Thank you.
And thank you. This particular project is extremely challenging, particularly when we look at the existing challenges that we're faced with right now. You know, with other projects that we're working on and COVID. At the same time that we want to see our economy enhanced, we also want to ensure that the lifestyle that people here wish to enjoy is protected. We do have the issue of lack of housing in all sectors. It's challenging to see that the other existing accommodators are suffering as a result of some of the activity that's been going on. It's going to be a tough one, and I would look to council to offer any thoughts or suggestions. From my perspective, the most important thing is fulsome consultation, that we talk to as many people as we possibly can and really gain a full understanding of all sides of the issue. Comments or questions? Councillor Kennedy.
Hi, thank you. I have a couple of comments and then maybe one question. I noticed that there's no reference to the municipal accommodation tax in your direction that you've been given. Is that going to be part of your recommendations at the far end, or was it even included in the RFP that went out? That's number one. I'm really concerned about the historical rental market that we've had for generations, where people rented their cottage for 2 or 3 weeks a year to pay for the taxes or to put a new dock in or new roof on. And then the recent commercialization of our rental properties, where it's almost a business. And I'm hoping that you will differentiate between the two, maybe with some minimum recommendations on those historical type of rentals, where it's just to cover some basic costs, and tighter regulations on the commercialization of our waterfront properties and others. The question I have, and I'm not sure, are bed and breakfast included in your review? I think they may be separate from this kind of a thing, but I'm not 100% sure. Thank you.
So through you, Warden Danielson, appreciate the question. So I'll begin with the first. So the municipal accommodation tax is included within the scope of work. We didn't specifically call it out in the memo, you're correct, but in my mind, that falls under the broad bucket of kind of legislation and regulation. The second piece around traditional cottage rentals and that model versus modern sort of cottage rental model, definitely we will keep that in mind as we go through the process. One way of perhaps distinguishing that, if you look at the examples that other municipalities offer, is in the number of nights that those properties are being made available. So there may be some ways of sort of getting at that question through those types of provisions, but we'll definitely keep that in mind. And then finally, questions relating to bed and breakfast, I would suggest that they're separate from this conversation. I would sort of regard those as being sort of a traditional accommodation industry, which would be distinct from the short-term rental accommodation. Some parallels for sure between the two of them, but they've been on the landscape a little bit longer. I think communities have much more experience sort of dealing with bed and breakfast establishments in terms of the regulatory framework for that. So we will be looking at those in terms under the bucket of consistency, to ensure that what we're doing to the recommendations that we're providing for the short-term rental accommodations are in line with the regulations that exist for other accommodation providers in Haliburton.
I think the issue of differentiating between bed and breakfast and short-term rentals might be a bit of a challenge, and I'm hoping to see that some kind of registration or something will help us to differentiate between the two. I know that some of the what we're seeing as problematic short-term rentals are calling themselves bed and breakfast, but really aren't in the traditional sense that we've seen for years. Other questions, concerns, suggestions for JL Richards? Councillor Moffat, then Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. In relation to our other project, the ongoing shoreline process, JL Richards is part of that process as well. And I do say this with all due respect, and Mr. Farragon knows from our personal conversations, I think he knows what's coming, that I was disappointed that the community comparators couldn't be realized in that project. I mentioned that at our last meeting. As you know, I didn't care for the survey at all. And I was disheartened that County Council didn't have access to much of the individual stakeholder feedback. So I'm just looking for confirmation that this project, which I believe to be likely just as contentious as the shoreline bylaw, that there's a commitment to approach those aspects differently this time.
So through you, Warden Danielson, yes. And I think the key differentiator between this process and the previous process, I would sort of suggest, would be in the previous process, there was a level of independence that was sort of requested in order to do the review. I would sort of say that this process will be sort of more collaborative in terms of the day-to-day approach on the project. Councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor Roberts.
So thank you, Warden. So just adding on to that, I actually think that this may be actually less controversial in that I know all the municipalities have been trying to deal with this on their own. We have at Dysart for, I feel like 8 years, trying to know what the next steps could be. And in our discussions, we've talked to, when I say stakeholders, we have quite a few local cottage rental agencies, so not the VRBO or Airbnbs, but there's 3 companies I can think of right off the top that manage a lot of cottages. And they were, for the most part, supportive of something like this. We've all tried to put through different bylaws, whether it be firework bylaw, or we've made our noise bylaw a little stronger, but we're still really limited, with some of these things. So I think actually this may be well received. I also think there's going to be a lot more examples of existing short-term rental bylaws out there, or short-term rental licenses, and through this, I brought this up to bring forward to County Council because it came up in the Dysart service delivery review, that there are opportunities as well, and you can separate them from the license as one thing and the MAT tax is something else. But if we are then, when we get the report and it's all said and done and we can decide whether we want to do the MAT tax, it's a really good opportunity to help offset some of the costs, to provide some of the things that people want, trails and some of the actual hands-on things. And we've all been to places where, at the bottom of your hotel bill, it's right in there. Whistler and Niagara Falls, and, City of Toronto has a tax on there. So it's not a bad thing. So I actually think this will be well received. One of the things I have concerns about is, and there's a project that may come forward, Steve Stone, you may want to speak to this, that's on the books and hasn't come to Dysart Council yet, but it's for a proposal for condominium units for the exclusive use of short-term rental. So that makes me a little bit nervous. It wouldn't be home sharing. It would be someone buying a unit to just put it in the pool to rent it out. But it technically qualifies under the Condominium Act. So I don't know, Steve, if you want to speak to that and where this type of bylaw might help support that not happening.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Roberts. So that would be the project that's over on Wallings Road, and it's sort of in its infancy in terms of they're working on satisfying the pre-consultation comments from the township as well as the county. So Dysart hasn't received a formal application on that, as I understand it. But that being said, through this process, Jason and his crew will certainly be aware of that, and they can, through the guidance of County Council, look at these types of developments and come up with an appropriate way to regulate them if that is the desire of County Council.
Go ahead.
Thanks, just for follow-up. And heaven forbid, if the developer's listening, it's not that I'm against a development and seeing something go forward on that property, but I do have concerns that it would be solely for the short-term rental, not just for what it might do to the community, but just for the fact that we are in such a need for housing. And I said at Dysart before, years ago, I used to own a property that I rented out, like Deputy Mayor Kennedy or Councillor Kennedy said, we used to rent it out for 6 weeks in the summer to cover some of our costs. If I'd had to purchase a license for that, I wouldn't have been against that whatsoever. And I've rented myself, either through Airbnb or actually in the county through a cottage rental association. So I'm all for having something. I just do have concerns where it's for the sole purpose. So a unit could be available 365 days a year and the homeowner never lived there. That's something I'm not in favor
of. Councillor Moffat, then DeVolen, then Burton.
Thank you. I agree with that. I think that's the value of going through this process is receive all the input. I mean, I think that the point is about management, not elimination. I mean, the entire idea of the sharing economy it's not what it once was. I think it's a serious misnomer now. This isn't about keeping the widow Mildred in her cabbage town, semi-detached in Toronto anymore. This is, and it does. I like Councillor Roberts, we had a cottage that we rented, the same for the few weeks to do the thing. And, but one wrong turn and we kicked you out. And that's the problem, is that people aren't being asked to conduct themselves accordingly. And I think anymore, it's just turned into an unregulated cash cow that has a lot of unintended collateral damage, while at the same time being really good for the economy. Because if you have a family that only goes to the Haliburton the Haliburton Forest Wolf Center once a season. If you have a different group of people in over a number of weeks, you might get more people moving around in the community. So there's no question the benefits are there, but it just definitely needs to be controlled. And I been keeping a file on rental complaints since 2015, and I look forward to advising all those folks that we're getting there and that they will finally get to have their say. Some of their stories are quite shocking, so I know those folks will be pleased to participate and help craft the process. So thank you.
Councillor DeVolen.
Well, thank you. It's good to see you, Jason, and your team to help us go through a process of a political minefield. That doesn't mean that we should be pansies about it and shirk our responsibilities. I guess my experience are in 3 communities across the country that are decades along this evolutionary path that mainly has a lot of upsides. Trombone, Blue Mountain, and Whistler, which have 3 very different kind of approaches to that. Specifically, those 3, will they be part of the resource material that you use in reference about how that has not worked out for those community, like I say, who have decades and decades of this type of thing to deal with?
So through you, Warden Danielson, yes. So our approach was to look beyond Ontario, and we had intended on looking at some of the more major tourist communities, that folks would be familiar with and would recognize. So that is included within the scope of our review.
Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Warden. I was going to mention the town of Blue Mountain to Jason as well. I think that would probably, with what they've done, probably satisfy some of Andrea's concerns. But we started this project 4 years ago with Highlands East, and it kind of got bogged down. It became very political. But my concerns then and still are, and maybe it's a bit premature for this, Jason, but environment is huge for me right now with the septics, etc. Parking was an issue if you go through hours that we were talking about as well. I guess my main concern is the ability to keep people safe when they're here.
Mm-hmm.
And their neighbors.
And their neighbors.
Yeah. Councillor Rael.
Yeah, I kind of share everybody's opinion here, but at the end of the day, some of the things we're talking about are getting onto the lines of time sharing and more or less a conglomerate type motel. I would hope that those would fall under a complete different category and would not be classified under short-term accommodation. They'd be more into a different class of their own, although the idea is the same. People are only taking those properties for a short period of time, but there could be multi-families in a given building or multi-dwellings in a given building. So I'm kind of hoping that becomes a second piece and not included in this. And the other thing is what Councillor Burton was saying is one of the things that we found when you started looking at the parking and stuff. Many of our cottages are on private roads. And because they're on private roads, it's a lot more difficult to enforce things like parking and occupancy and those kind of things, because we were having discussions with the OPP as to who had jurisdiction in those areas. And it got pretty muddy when you got into that area. So I'm kind of hoping that you can share some clarity on this as we go along as to where jurisdictions overlap and where there could be a gap depending on what particular subjects we're talking about.
Other questions or comments? Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, I was just, and I put my hand down quickly because I think I'm just going to belabor something, but I think the environment, as has been mentioned, is something that we hear about most frequently, which goes hand in hand with the septic inspections and capacity of a system attached to a property, fisheries, fireworks, shoreline activities, recycling. Like the list is endless, and I know we'll get there, but that's that. And trespass. The number of people who have said, I got up this morning for coffee and the neighbors' renters were sitting on my dock fishing, and when I asked them if they'd leave my dock, they swore at me. We can't govern attitude, but I think there has to be an education package as well about how to be a good landlord. There are still a number of people who are renting out properties wherein they're not providing as detailed information as they can in terms of emergency services and the provision thereof by the municipality. So anyway, I have a list that we'll get to sometime.
Of course you have a list, but you know, valid points. I don't think that's belaboring the subject at all. Other comments or concerns? Councillor Burton.
We had actually made up packages for, and we would put them on the table, or the people put them on the table. We had landfill cards in it. We had what to do in town and different businesses set in them, and it seemed to work very well. We were concerned about maybe the garbage not getting to the landfill, but it did work for us.
Other questions or comments? Well, hearing none, I'd like to thank you and your team for your presentation. We look forward to continuing with this process. I'm sure it'll be interesting for us all, if not challenging. And I look forward to our next meeting, and I'm sure you'll get continued input from this body.
Which we look forward to. Oh, sorry,
Go
Madam
ahead.
Warden. I was just going to say, which we look forward to and appreciate. I think we've enjoyed our discussions with County Council and appreciate, you know, your passion for the community, your knowledge, and the direction that you provide us. So thank you very much, and we look forward to taking next steps with you.
Thanks, Jason. If I could have a mover and a seconder to accept this report. Councillors Moffat and Shell.
By Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor Shell, be it resolved that Haliburton County Council receives for information the short-term rental accommodation review presentation from J.L. Richards.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Next is approval of the reports and recommendations from the Committee of the Whole. Does anyone have any questions on that report? Hearing none, could I have a mover and a seconder to receive those recommendations? Councillor Kennedy and Councillor Moffat.
Moved by Councillor Kennedy, seconded by Councillor Moffat, be it resolved that the recommendations from the January 12th, 2022 meeting of Haliburton County Committee of the Whole be adopted by Haliburton County Council.
All in favor? That's carried. No reports or recommendations from accessibility, so we'll move right into planning, and Mr. Stone remains on the screen. So we'll first hear your planning department update, or maybe just provide us with any highlights of that report.
No, it's fairly straightforward. Thank you.
Any questions on the planning department update? Hearing none, could I have a mover and a seconder to accept that report? Councillors DeVolen and Roberts.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Roberts, be it resolved that the January 26, 2022 Planning Department Update Projects Staff Report be received for information by Haliburton County Council.
All in favor? That's carried. Next is the application for plan of subdivision and condominium on Center Lake in Highlands East.
Yes, thank you, Madam Warden. Just quick overview of this application. It actually has been in the works for many years now. I think looking at traffic in the file from my predecessors, I think the proponent reached out as far back as 2015. There's been a number of pre-consultations. They formally submitted last January, and as I said, my predecessors reviewed what was submitted, determined there was a few things that were missing, and since then, the proponents have been busily updating their reports and studies and resubmitted their application to the county in December. And by regulation through the Planning Act, we're then obligated to do a review of that submission to determine if it's complete in accordance with the Planning Act. And so that was done. The applicant was formally notified of that January 12th. And we've begun the process of soliciting comments from agencies and property owners. That started again after the 12th. We're anticipating that the comment window for this project will be 60 days or so, and that would bring it to the end of March. And provided the comments that are received are not challenging, then we tentatively will schedule a public meeting for first airing of this project at the council meeting in April. Now, the caveat to that is that if the review comments come back and there's more information that's required of the applicant, then we'll postpone that meeting. But that's where we're at with it right now. We've engaged, the township has been advised, and we've also included all the ministry who have program influence on this project, and our peer review consultant has also been engaged, and they're going to be assessing what the peer review costs, and then we'll update the applicant on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one brief comment about your report. Was very hard to read. It's so small on the agenda that I found it difficult to read. This has been on the books for some time, and I had no idea that it was quite a substantial development that it is. So it'll be interesting to hear what the feedback is on it. Just to confirm, you do have all the reports required, all the initial reports that were required.
That's right. They came in 2 waves, first in January of last year, and then again in December of this year, or December of last year.
Are there any questions on this application at this time? Councillor Moffat.
I have a bit of a strange question, a bit of a moral dilemma. I'd like clarification, in the report. It does say that it's the opinion of staff that the report be received. So we're gonna have a motion to receive the information. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because I do not support this subdivision, this application at all. And I'm just a little unsure as to where I sit on my moral fence post. So just to clarify, if the vote that is going to be called is to receive the information, I'm fine with that. But I have a serious problem with the development of this size and scope. But I don't think that's our job to comment on that at this time.
That is correct. As I said, there will be formally under the Planning Act, Council will have to host a public meeting, and then from there, Council can decide whether there's merit to this application at a future meeting.
Thank you.
Councillor Roberts.
Through you, Warden, can I ask either our Director of Planning or Councillor Burton, what is the role at Highlands East for this project? I recall seeing it years ago. I remember seeing, in fact, I think we had a delegation that showed us, and it is a very major project for Highlands East for sure, but just in terms of their planning department and how these work concurrently. So one is plan a subdivision, what's the responsibility, or what does the planning department and Highlands East Council have to do?
Go ahead. Go
So
ahead.
if I may, again, the report is for information, because I know it's quite a significant development, both for the county to consider as well as the township. The township's role in our process, or the county's process, is to be a commenting agency. So in due course, I would imagine the matter will go before the township council, and they'll provide us with a resolution and formal comments to that effect. And then that will be presented to county council as part of the planning department's analysis of this project.
Other questions or comments? Councillor DeVolen.
Well, I could comment. Yeah, it's been a long time coming, and back around. I couldn't philosophically be further than my colleague, Councillor Moffat, on this, but within bounds. It has seemed there's been in my lifetime 2 or 3 economic booms that the eastern part of the county has missed, and this is the opportunity for them to have a big boost. It's proximity to the town site of Cardiff, whatever. There's lots of upsides, whatever. So again, not open-ended, but without some bounds. So obviously, clearly, County Council represents a wide spectrum of this, and I look forward to the public comments, whether they're more akin to Councillor Moffat's view or mine, and to see whether this will or won't be a reality.
Other comments or concerns? Then I look to council for a motion to receive the application for information. Councillor DeVolen and Councillor Rowell.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Ryle. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council received the January 26, 2022 staff report on the application for plan of subdivision or condominium vacant land, file number 46T22011, Granite Shore, Center Lake East, as information.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Next is a related report to Center Lake related to the disposition of 200 feet of Crown Reserve. If you could speak to that, please, Steve.
Thank you, Madam Warden. Yes, you are correct. This is related application. It was initially circulated by the ministry back last year, early in 2021. The local township has processed it and rendered a resolution with regards to their position on it. We were asked by the ministry to provide comments, and initially my comments were, are you going to undertake any sort of environmental review with regards to the disposition of the shoreline lands? And their response says that was outside the purview of their scope of their review, and they continued to ask for a position. And so this, I indicated that I would present the matter to County Council. Given the previous report and the fact that we received and are processing a complete application for a plan of condominium on lands abutting this Crown Reserve, it's my position, or the department's position, that we really can't offer, or County Council can't offer a position until it's evaluated the merits of the plan of subdivision / condominium. Thank you.
If my understanding is correct, Highlands East was not supportive of going forward with this.
That is correct.
Are there any questions or comments at this time? Councillor Moffat?
Yeah, I mean, it just feels a bit cart before the horse. They do go together, and let's let one happen and then the other. To me, anyway, yeah.
Which I think is the rationale behind the recommendation that we defer any decision on this for now.
Yeah.
Any other comments? So could I have a mover and a seconder to defer making any or taking any position? Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Ryle.
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Ryle. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council received the January 26, 2022 staff report on the disposition of 200-foot Crown Reserve, Center Lake, Township of Highlands East, and that Haliburton County Council defer the taking of a position on the Ministry of Northern Development, Natural Resources and Forestry's Crown Land Use Policy Atlas Amendment 2020-004 until such time as it has fulsomely evaluated the merits of the plan of subdivision condominium, file number 46T22001, Granite Shores, Center Lake East.
All in favor? That's carried. Finally, under the planning portfolio, report on community engagement for the community action plan.
I believe Corey is going to join us for this presentation.
Okay. Good morning, Corey.
Good morning, Warden Danielson and members of council. In October, County Council approved a report that outlined 3 phases for community engagement for the Community Climate Action Plan. This report provides more details on the purpose for engagement, the platforms to be used, as well as the process for identifying organizations to be consulted. The report also provides a link to a community climate action guide that outlines actions that can be taken today to reduce emissions and build resilience to a changing climate at the household level. And this resource will be promoted to the community through the engagement process as well. So happy to answer any questions that council might have.
Any questions on this report? Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, I'm happy to see this get moving, and I'd like to excuse me, know a little bit more about the setting of the priorities and the goals and the ultimate outcome that will obviously lay at the feet of the county and the municipalities to implement and fund. And it is very often the case with all due respect to our citizenry, folks often don't understand the challenges and the existing conflicts and priorities of municipalities. So what's the process for ensuring that that this process doesn't create an impossible wish list that is unachievable and makes us look like the bad guys if we can't do it all? How are you going to make sure that that doesn't happen?
Yeah, if I can. Part of the recommendation for using Othello as opposed to doing just a traditional simple survey for these phases 1 and 2 of engagement is that it's a little more complex, and the algorithm actually sets parameters to say you can't exceed a certain level of difficulty. So all these strategies may have levels of difficulty assigned to them. We also have to do a minimum amount. So a member of the community can't go into the engagement saying, we don't want to do anything, or that, everything needs to be done right away. And so that's part of the benefits of partnering with Othello for this, is that there are certain parameters that the communities, they design their own plan, and it has to fall within this certain level of difficulty.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was going to say that. So that's what that means when it says the platform has built-in parameters where trade-offs must be considered. So it's almost like a consensus building to get to an achievable outcome.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Hearing none, then could I thanks very much, Corey, and could I have a mover and a seconder to approve the draft framework? Councillor Burton and Councillor Moffat.
Moved by Councillor Burton, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council received the January 26, 2022 staff report on community engagement for the Community Climate Action Plan as information, and that Haliburton County Council approve the draft framework as a basis for community engagement.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you.
Warden.
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but before our Director of Planning leaves, can I ask him a question, or through you as well? Because it's been asked of me how we left our shoreline bylaw meeting a week ago Monday, and I really didn't know what our next steps were going to be. And I did say I would bring this question up. And if you don't know the next steps, fine. I'll just ask Mike to do another doodle poll, which we all love. But in all seriousness, we do need to address this again. And I just wondered if there was a plan.
We're quite aware that we need to address it again. I mean, there were a number of questions and concerns raised, and those need to be addressed. And then the plan is to establish another special meeting as soon as we possibly can, as soon as we're all available. So there he goes. Go, Mike, go with the doodle poll as soon as he can. And as soon as we have the responses to our, to the questions and concerns that were raised.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question? Did you want to make any other comments, Steve?
Yes, we've actually, we're going to have a staff working session on this matter tomorrow afternoon. So we're excited about that opportunity, and hopefully we can get the I's and T's dotted and crossed, and hopefully back before council in short order.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Next is are the administrative reports. First on that list is the correspondence listing. Any comments or concerns about the correspondence listing? Hearing none, could I have a mover and a seconder to receive that listing? Councillor Kennedy and Councillor Shell.
Moved by Councillor Kennedy, seconded by Councillor Shell. Be it resolved that the correspondence listing for the period of December 8th, 2021 to January 18th, 2022 be received for information by Haliburton County Council.
All in favor? That's carried. Next is the report on the land acknowledgement statement. I'd like to thank Mike for his work on this, as well as Mr. Chad Ingram.
I thank you, Warden. I think Chad deserves the lion's share of the credit. As noted in the report, we staff of all the local municipalities and the county attended some training earlier or late in the fall, or early in the fall, I guess. We relied very heavily on that, as well as some information that had been produced locally, some research work. And so we've used the land acknowledgement recommended by Curve Lake First Nation, which is the First Nation most closely, closest geographically to us. And we have tweaked it to acknowledge that there has been a historical presence of other First Nations communities, but there's certainly no treaty rights for those. So we've incorporated those two together and I believe this is practically identical to Algonquin Highlands land acknowledgement and very similar to the other local municipalities as well.
So one quick question for me, do we have to amend our procedural bylaw to include that statement?
Yeah, we will. I think by adopting it, the resolution that's in the staff report or the recommendation that's in the staff report, we would be able to use it in the short term while we wait for a fulsome review of our procedural bylaw. So yeah, I think the resolution would give us authority to use it starting at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to a fulsome review of the procedure, as you all know. So would you include the statement at the top of our actual agenda form, just for ease of?
Yes, we would propose to do that.
Okay, questions and comments. Councillor DeVolen, then Councillor Roberts.
Well, we're in changing times, and thank you for the work that's done by Chad and Algonquin Highlands on this. It's truly appreciated, and certainly referring to the meeting we had yesterday, a ministerial delegation, Councillor Moffat and I had. The QE2 wildlands is a non-operating park, and I have talked a number of times with some of the First Nation from the Ramara, and at Isidore Day, when he was Grand Chief for Ontario, whatever, that there's a unique opportunity to do something new in our county and forge an alliance and a relationship with our First Nations to the west. And this is a sign of respect and whatever, that a token offering of where our heads are at, and that we may do some interesting and historical things in our community to protect it in the way that the First Nations have always wanted to, but also open up opportunities in terms of development and other things in our county. So thank you everybody for this. And I know that's quite long-winded, but it's something that I've felt strongly about for a long time.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I do see that we do have opportunities for partnerships and working together on projects going forward. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. Yes, we adopted something similar, but we actually added, there's a whole sort of second paragraph. So I don't know, Mike, if you had a chance to look at what we say at Dysart. Maybe it's a little bit longer, but also we had input from, I believe, Curve Lake, and that's where we came up with what we say. And just for the sake of not changing the procedural bylaw like every month, there's always a line that says wardens opening remarks, so it could just be fit in there, but which would be great. I think this is a great step forward.
Any other comments or questions, concerns? Could I have a mover and a seconder to accept the report and move forward with the statement? Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Burton.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Burton. Be it resolved that Halliburton County Council received the January 26, 2022 Land Acknowledgement Statement Staff Report, and that the draft Land Acknowledgement Statement be adopted as presented. And finally, that this statement be posted on the county website, read at the beginning of each meeting of County Council, committees, and boards, and at the opening of county events.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Next is a brief review of our goals and objectives, our strategic planning process. We look to Mr. Rudder for that.
Thank you. I won't, unless there are questions, I know we have a lot on the agenda today. I won't really go into any detail. I would say that I think we are largely on track with most of the objectives that were established by council at the beginning of your term or close to the beginning of your term. I believe in many of the areas we've made significant progress and continue to do that. So unless there are questions, I don't really have a lot more to add.
Are there any questions? Councillor Roberts.
Just a comment. I really appreciate this report. It helps keep us on track. It really is, great to have in print to see what we set out to do and where we're at. And it certainly has been a challenging last couple of years to still continue on some of these things. But I just want to thank Mike for this report.
Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report? Councillor Roberts and Councillor Moffat.
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that Halliburton County Council received the January 26, 2022 Goals and Objectives Strategic Plan for 2020 to 2022 Annual Update Report.
All in favor? That's carried. Next is the report on council remuneration. Any questions or comments there? Councillor Burton. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. There was nothing in there about the deputy, and I just wondered if there should be.
Oh, that's.
The deputies is noted in the bylaw. I think that when council originally talked about that, they talked about an additional $1,500, and so we've tried to incorporate those numbers in the draft bylaw that's attached to the staff report.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Roberts, then Councillor Moffat.
So, this is great. So it's hard to talk about our salaries, but it's a good thing it's at the end of our term. And so whoever's sitting at this table next year will know what the rates are, and they are fair. We've done a good comparison, and it's hard work if anyone wants the job.
That's an understatement.
Can I say then that we will no longer need to submit a timesheet? This is it's just a base rate. Is that correct?
Well, we expect you to be accountable. No.
152 hours.
It is a base rate, and what there is still a per diem for anything other than committee of the whole or council, and so you would be required to submit a timesheet for that, but not your base. Yeah.
Darn, still got to do those timesheets. Councillor Moffat.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is important. I agree with what Councillor Roberts said. There are literally people out there who still think that, this is an outrageous amount of money for the 2 meetings a month that we go to. And I think really there are tons of people who genuinely understand the scope of the job, but there are still a tremendous number of people who really don't know what it is that we do. And as Councillor Roberts said, fall's coming quickly. Put your name in if you want to. And I think at the proposed rates, it's still underpaid for some of the bigger projects for the benefit of the community. I mean, there was the newspaper article that said what the percentage increase was going to be for the county tax rate. All kinds of people were saying, I hope the county councillors take a 3.27% pay cut. It's like, we don't make 150 grand. Like, anyway, I think these numbers are fair. I agree that it's good to do it ahead of an election so that people coming in who are thinking of the job are considering real numbers. We know that what keeps people from running for office is the pay, because most people still have to have a job. And I think we slowly need to move toward these being jobs with the growth the community is seeing. We owe it to our community to provide full-time positions in governance, and I hope we get there. I hope we get there one day. Thank you.
Yeah, point well taken, especially when it comes to some of the special projects that we're involved in, and the level of oversight that's involved in that. You know, I just as an example, the work that you put into community safety and well-being, that's just one. So if there are no more comments, I would look for a mover and a seconder to receive and approve this report. Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor Shell.
Moved by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor Shell. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council received the January 26, 2022 staff report on the 2022 council remuneration, and that staff be directed to present a bylaw establishing rates for 2022.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, we have a number of financial reports. Shall we plow through? Shall we take a very brief break? We've still got a fair bit to do this morning. Looking for thoughts. A small break. Okay. 10 minutes. Let's resume at 1:45. Will that be sufficient for everyone? Okay. Thanks very much. See you in 10 minutes.
And we're back live, Warden Davidson.
Thank you. So next are the financial reports, or a series of financial reports. If we could bring in our Director of Corporate Services. Good morning, Andrea.
Good morning, Warden and Council.
So first is your financial indicator review.
I believe the investment report is first.
Sorry.
That's okay. All of the county's investments are with the Local Authority Services 1 investment and are funds that are not immediately required for operating purposes. As you can see within the report, the county has a mixed portfolio of investments, including high interest savings account, money market, bond, and equity portfolios. Currently, the county has $6.4 million invested and has earned a total of $245,726 in investment income to date. Of that, $101,198 was earned in 2021. Are there any questions regarding the investment report?
Any questions? Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive that report? Councillor Roberts and Councillor DeVolen. I'm sorry, Councillor Roberts, did you have a question?
Well, it was, but it's minor detail, but I'll still move it. And it just, so like the bulk of this higher interest savings account in 2021, the 4 million, where did that come from?
The dollars being invested?
Yeah, sorry, the dollars being invested.
That is our reserves, essentially, our reserve funds that would be invested in those months.
And so those are all very accessible because it's a savings account. I mean, they're not, it's obviously the lowest of the interest rates, but it's, you know, as we need to draw from, we can, it's very accessible.
Yes, any of the monies invested with one investment can be pulled at any time. It doesn't matter what portfolio they're in.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we have a mover and a seconder. Could we hear the resolution, please?
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor DeVolen. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council receives for information the investment report as at December 31st, 2021. And further, that the investment report as at December 31st, 2021 be hereby approved.
All in favor? That's carried. Next is your financial indicator review.
Annually, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing review each municipality's financial health through the use of key financial indicators, as you can see attached to my report. Similar to 2019's report, MMAH has shown one area of concern on our report, our asset consumption ratio. This indicates how much of the asset's life expectancy has been consumed. Although this is still showing as a moderate risk, the county has improved its rating slightly since 2019 from 67.6% to 65.9%. It is assumed that this will continue to improve over 2021 and 2022 based on council's approved capital spending over these 2 years. The expectation is that municipalities would have an asset consumption ratio of less than 50%. Currently, the provincial average is 51.9. All other areas on our report have been identified as a low risk. Does anyone have any questions with regards to that report?
Hearing none, could I have a mover and a seconder to accept that report? Councillor Ryle, seconded by Councillor Burton.
By Councillor Ryle, seconded by Councillor Burton. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council receives for information the January 26, 2022 staff report on the 2020 financial indicator review.
All in favor? That's carried. Next is the report on a borrowing bylaw and annual repayment limits.
Annually, the borrowing bylaw is brought forward to council for approval. The current one presented to you today has no changes from the previous year. Currently, the county has 2 debenture payments as outlined in my report with a current annual repayment amount of $452,535. The county's 2021 annual repayment limit as calculated by MMAH was just over $4.1 million. This means that the county currently has $3,666,492 capacity for debt repayment.
Questions or comments? Councillor DeVolen.
Every year when I see this, both at the county at Minden Hills, it's talk about they give you enough rope to hang yourself, that, you know, we're using 10% or less of the capacity that we're deemed to have. And these are on good long-term asset bases, which is the way these things should be used. We may get more adventurous in the future and think outside the box, whether we want to participate and get in the housing business more aggressively or whatever. But for anybody looking, this is a very, very conservative approach to using borrowing to fulfill politicians' wish lists. So just anyways, it's just like I say, I just think every year is how much rope we could have to hang ourselves if we wish to.
Not just politicians' wish list, but the public's wish list as well, which could be very well be longer. Any other comments or questions? Could I have a mover and a seconder? Oh, sorry, Councillor Ryle, you have a question?
I was just going to ask, there seems to be a fairly amount of discussion on the fluctuation of current interest rates. Are we pretty well protected from that, or are we going to be absorbing as we go along? Just asking.
Well, you can't predict anything, but as far as going into the borrowing for 2022, I believe rates are staying fairly consistent at this time, but I think that is something we should look into probably sooner than later of this year.
Councillor DeVolen.
I think if we look at the Ontario annual repayment limit, they, we know there's going to be some creeping up, but they show 5% and 7%, which is an awfully long way from where we currently are. So even there's a huge buffer or insurance kind of in how they calculate and illustrate to us. If we actually plugged in today's actual number, the limit that we could borrow would be unbelievable.
Scary. Go ahead, Mr. Rutter.
I just wanted to maybe put a plug in for a report that we'll see in a little bit further on the agenda. One of the reasons we are looking for, trying to get out to market for our bridge projects in particular is that a lot of that work will be debt financed. And so we would like to get those rates locked in as soon as possible. I think as Councillor DeVolen indicated, there will be some creeping up of rates, may even start today if it hasn't. That announcement, I think, is done today. So we'd like to get those rates locked in as soon as we possibly could.
Thanks for that. So could I have a mover and a seconder to accept this report? Councillor DeVolen, Councillor Moffat.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council receives for information the staff report on the borrowing bylaw and annual repayment limit, and further that the report on the borrowing bylaw and annual repayment limit be hereby approved.
All in favor? That's carried. Next up are the anticipated reserve allocations for 2021.
Yes, in the past, the staff have presented a single report to council, typically after audit, recommending transfers to or from reserves in the process of finalizing our year-end information. In an effort to provide council the most accurate year-end surplus information for 2022 budget discussions, as requested at Committee of the Whole, I would like to recommend an interim transfer of reserves be considered for project-specific and/or funding items. Some of the transfers indicated in my report are included in the 2022 budget numbers as transfers from reserves as proposed projects for this year. I will be bringing council an update on the 2021 surplus along with updated 2022 budget report at the February Committee of the Whole.
Thank you. Questions, Councillor Roberts?
One question I have to Andrea and also to Mike and fellow councillors is just, do we have sort of reserve policies, for instance, where maybe development reserve is just slightly different or infrastructure projects, but for instance, one line, the integrity commissioner. Some years you may need that service a lot, and some years not so much, and you were able to transfer. Are we going to have policies where we sort of hit a ceiling and we don't need to contribute if there's been unused amounts? Like, so we're transferring $45,000 to the Integrity Commissioner Reserve. What's the ceiling?
Do you mind if let me take a first kick at that? I think until recently, we haven't had many reserves to worry about. So that's a relatively new thing here. So, but yeah, we are hopeful that we will develop that policy over the next year or so. But we don't have anything in place at this point. What the other thing, and I think Councillor Kennedy had asked for this early in the budget process, is what is our sustainability number in a number of categories? And so we really are working to try and define that for council so that you can see that. The question at the last Committee of the Whole about the budget and has led to about 6 or 7 other questions. And so we really are doing our best to put that stuff together so that council can make as informed a decision as possible about that. So.
Thank you.
Councillor DeVolen.
Yeah, and kind of a long way around to get the same thing, like my question. And first of all, the transfer of the rental money going to the Haliburton Daycare Reserve. I know the Minden building's new, but it eventually at some point won't be. And with respect to our asset management plan, so that bigger plan, Mike, we'll come forward with all of those things so that we'll do a sustainable path as part of our overall package of assets as we move forward in that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the goal. With respect to the daycare in Haliburton, council will recall that we paid for that out of our reserves and with a commitment to repay it using the rental revenue to repay that back to our reserves. So this is, I think, the third year that we've paid that back. So yeah, and that's done with interest. So but that is our plan is to have that clearly defined for council, what those levels should be based on asset management plans, based on replacement schedules, that kind of thing.
Councillor Kennedy, did you have a question?
I did, but it's been answered. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions on the interim reserve allocations? Hearing none, could I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report? Councillor Kennedy and Moffat.
Moved by Councillor Kennedy, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council received for information the January 26, 2022 staff report on the interim reserve allocations and approves the transfers to and from reserves as outlined in the report.
All in favor? That's carried. So we have 2 requests for RFTs to go out in advance of the approved budget. Do you wish to speak to those, Andrea? Or would somebody else be speaking?
I think we're bringing in Director Sutton to speak to those.
Okay. Good morning, Robert.
Good morning, Warden. Good morning, Council.
So first is your request for release of tenders for structural construction programs.
Yes, and I'd like to thank Mr. Rudder for pointing out one of the reasons why we're trying to put that out right now. We also really would like to get these tenders on the street so that we can get good contractors and get good prices for the county and for ratepayers. I'm open to answering any questions that council may have.
Any questions on either one of these requests? Could I have a mover and a seconder then to approve the request for structural construction? Councillor Royale and Councillor Shell.
Moved by Councillor Ryle, seconded by Councillor Shell. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council approve the for staff to proceed with the release of requests for tenders for the 2022 structural construction program as part of the 2022 budget allocation.
All in favor? That's carried. And next is the request for hot mix and surface treatments. Did you have any specific comments that you wanted to make about those, Robert?
Not really, just again, same idea of trying to get the tender out and elicit response. I could note for council's benefit that we do coordinate with some of the municipalities and we do carry the piggyback clause as Minden Hills is working on their surface treatment road. So we did try to work a little bit together. Some of the municipalities actually have tenders that they're renewing this year. So as we move forward, we'll be hopefully coordinating much more on these sorts of projects.
Music to our ears. Thank you. Could I have a mover and a seconder on the hot mix and surface treatment projects? Councillor Roberts and Councillor Moffat.
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council provide approval for staff to proceed with the release of requests for tenders for the 2022 hot mix and surface treatment projects as part of the 2022 budget allocation.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Next up are reports and minutes from external boards and agencies. Anything you wish to bring to our attention, Councillor Roberts, on the health unit?
No, not unless there's any questions for me. I think we had a great delegation by Dr. Balking this morning. So,
any questions or comments for Councillor Roberts? Okay. Anything on point in time, Councillor Shell?
We met last night for the first time since November, and we did a SWOT exercise that didn't end until just before 9 p.m. So yeah, I'm not really sure how public all of that stuff is, but it was a really good exercise. It was really good exercise.
Well, that's good to hear. And we look forward to hearing, some news going forward about how those decisions may impact your work. On the Warden's Caucus front, we've had several meetings in the last week, in particular in preparation for the Roma conference. We did have a number of delegations that were made by our chair, but specifically by the caucus to multi-ministers, to the NDP and the Liberal caucuses. Got to say, I won't say that. As you're aware, our priorities remain the same as they did last year. The caucus will be doing a priority setting, I believe, in March, to look at those things that we want to concentrate on going forward. So the presentations at the beginning of the week remain on housing and all aspects of housing. We had a fulsome conversation with Minister Clark about that. We talked about long-term care and the challenges associated with long-term care going forward. Minister Fullerton was in attendance for that. And we also talked about the Ontario health teams and moving forward with the modernization of health. With some brief points being made about joint and several liability, which continues to be of pretty serious interest, and I'm not sure just how much activity we're going to see in that regard. I've got to say, I think it was challenging to get any real solid commitment from anybody, given the timing in the upcoming election, and the fact that we're still basically in the pandemic mode. But the caucus made their points. The presentations were extremely well done. We used a little bit different process this year than has been done in the past. And the conversations were a little more open and fulsome in some cases. Other than that, nothing more to say. Councillor DeVolen.
I have a question, and it's not related to the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus, but the other hat that you wear with AMO. A number of us were part of the Roma conference from Sunday through the last couple of days, and they tabled the opportunities for rural Ontario in a post-COVID world and 23 recommendations from the Wardens Caucus and/or AMO. Is there an interest to take a look at that and help push some of that agenda along with Roma? So I'm asking you both, as from the AMO side and the Wardens Caucus side, have you seen it or had any conversation about it, or do you think that you might?
Well, there hasn't been any conversation about it to date. It's just been released by Roma. I think that it's something that we should be looking at, and I'm not sure whether that's been discussed by the CAOs at all about what might be on the agenda for our upcoming meeting. But our interests align in many ways, and I think that is something that we need to have on our agenda and discuss and see where we can work together and support their initiatives. Does that answer your question? Okay, next up is joint social and housing committee.
We haven't met since the last time we were together and reported.
Okay. Up next are anything on professional recruitment. I think that our recruiter is working diligently behind the scenes in every way that she can. And just as an additional comment, we're pushing as hard as we can for a meeting with representatives of HHS. I'm not hopeful that it's going to be in the next couple of weeks, but we're pushing for a meeting in or towards the end of February. And hopefully we can have some fulsome conversation there. Next is the library board. Anything that you wish to bring forward specifically possibly Councillor Roberts from the Library Board. We have some minutes.
We have lots of minutes. We've been meeting a lot. The library's really gone through a transition in the last year with the change of CEOs and having an interim and a new CEO. And really, there's just I feel like we're kind of recharged and ready to go. But it has been a transition, and so we did do our strategic planning session way back in September, I believe it was, when he had just started, and so. He is working diligently on that to bring that forward to the library. But one thing I just want to point out is the addition to it's an app called Canopy. And so a lot of people have things like Netflix, but those cost a lot of money, and then next thing you know, all the good British shows are gone. So you got to buy BritBox. It's just annoying. So Canopy is a free streaming service that you can put on any device, on your phone, on a tablet, computer. And it was kickstarted by a donation from the Haliburton Rotary Club. And that's because our CEO went to do a talk at Rotary and he didn't even ask. It's just next thing you know, they said, what could we do? So it's being provided through the Haliburton Rotary Club, and I downloaded it on my phone, and it's just great. Like there's all kinds of things to view. So I really encourage people to take advantage of the Canopy app. You just need internet service. Sorry.
Small thing. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay, next are the external boards and agencies. Any updates on Good Roads, Councillor Burton?
I do not have an update this morning, other than that we are working away at our conference. We're still hoping to have it in person. The membership are requesting that. So what we've done actually is moved it on to April. From March. Hopefully things will be maybe a bit back to normal then, and we're still hoping to have it in person.
I can't tell you how many people I'm hearing say that they really and truly look forward to the day when we can have in-person conferences. They're just so much more beneficial in, especially when it comes to the networking and just, meeting people in person, actually meeting people. So I'm sure we all look forward to that.
It's interesting.
Go ahead.
It's quite interesting. Our numbers have been way up with registration, but the suppliers as well. And I thought maybe when we had moved it that we would lose a few, but actually we're gaining. So it's quite
good news. That's good to hear. Any updates for us from the Eastern Ontario Regional Network?
No, we haven't met in the last 2 weeks since the last time.
Okay. Nothing under Indigenous Affairs. I'm not sure why Poverty Reduction Roundtable has been placed under Indigenous Affairs. Is there anything that you wish to bring to us on poverty reduction?
I don't. They actually met Monday while I was in the Roman conference, so I did not attend, and I haven't seen the minutes of it to comment on Warden Danielson. You have something? I see.
Go ahead, Mike.
Well, further to council's direction, I have reached out to the new staff person at the Poverty Reduction Roundtable, and we are working to finalize her attendance at a meeting in February. So there will be a full update there, I'm sure.
Well, that's good to hear. Okay, could I have a mover and a seconder to receive the reports and minutes from external boards and agencies? Councillor Moffat and Councillor Kennedy.
Moved by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor Kennedy. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council receives for information the following: the December 2nd, 2021 Haliburton Kawartha Pine Ridge District Health Unit Board of Health approved minutes. The Haliburton County Library Board December 8th approved 2021 approved minutes, and the draft minutes from the January 11th, 2022 special meeting and the January 12th, 2022 regular meeting of the Haliburton County Public Library Board.
All in favor? That's carried. Next is the meeting calendar for February. Any errors or omissions? Councillor Roberts.
Thanks. February 8th, Committee of the Whole for Dicer.
Thank you. Next is something a little bit more delightful. We will receive an introduction to our new manager of tourism.
So we'll bring in our Director of Economic Development and Tourism, who will make the introduction.
Good morning, Scott.
Good morning, Warden and committee, or council, sure, I should say. Just wanted to take a moment this morning and introduce you to our new manager of tourism, Tracy Burchin. We're quite excited to have her. She comes to us by way of Peterborough Kawartha Lakes Economic Development Corporation. And she's been with us. She just started on January 3rd. So the same day as some of the restrictions were announced. So it's been a bit of a hectic period for her, but starting to get her feet wet and familiarize herself with stakeholders. And I'll just pass it off to her briefly.
Welcome, Tracy.
Thank you so much, Warden and Council. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to work for Council and stakeholders of Haliburton County, and looking very forward to jumping in and moving as quickly as possible and learning as much as I can about this beautiful region. So thank you again for the opportunity. Very happy to be here.
Well, it's exciting times with the changes that we've made in economic development and tourism, and we look forward to seeing your work going forward. Once again, welcome to the group.
Thank you, Warden. Thank you, Council.
Next up is the Health and Safety Annual Policy Review.
We'll bring in our Health and Safety Coordinator and Deputy Clerk to make that presentation.
And good morning, Warden Danielson and members of County Council.
Good morning, Michelle.
Before you this morning is the Health and Safety Staff Report and related policies that is presented annually to County Council for review and approval as required under the Occupational Health and Safety Act or by county policy. And Council should note that once the policies are approved, staff have them posted on the Health and Safety boards at all workplace locations throughout the county. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have regarding the policies this morning.
Are there any questions from council? Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report? Councillor DeVolen and Roberts.
By Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Roberts. Be resolved that Haliburton County Council approves the 2022 Health and Safety Annual Policy Review Staff Report, confirming that the 2022 Health and Safety Policy Statement, the 2022 Health and Safety Duties and Responsibilities Policy, and the Workplace Violence, Harassment, and Sexual Harassment Policy be reviewed as required by policy and or the Occupational Health and Safety Act.
All in favor? That's carried. Thanks for your work on health and safety, Michelle.
Thank you, Warden.
Next is a correspondence from AMO with a call to action with respect to joint and several liability. Did you have any comments you wanted to make about that? I think it's pretty clear what they're looking for. Are there any concerns or comments about supporting this request? Hearing none, could I have a mover and a seconder to approve supporting this? Councillor Moffat and Councillor Shell.
Moved by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor Shell. Whereas municipal governments provide essential services to the residents and businesses in their communities, and whereas the ability to provide those services is negatively impacted by exponentially rising insurance costs, and whereas one driver of rising insurance costs is the legal principle of joint and several liability, which assigns disproportionate liability to municipalities for an incident relative to their responsibility for it. And whereas the Government of Ontario has the authority and responsibility for the legal framework of joint and several liability. And whereas the Premier of Ontario committed to review the issue in 2018 with a view to helping municipal governments manage their risks and costs. And whereas the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, on behalf of municipal governments, has provided recommendations in this source document to align municipal liability with the proportionate responsibility for incidents and capping awards. Now therefore be it resolved that the County of Haliburton does hereby support AMO's recommendations, and further be it resolved that the County of Haliburton does hereby call on the Attorney General of Ontario to work with municipal governments to put forward a plan of action to address joint and several liability before the end of the government's term, so that municipalities can continue to offer high quality services to their communities.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Let's hope it has some impact. Okay, last but not least, before we go into closed session, is the election of a deputy warden. I believe that we may have one person who has indicated an interest in the position. Did you have any comments that you wanted to make, Mr. Rutter?
No, other than if, as we did last year, I believe, if there are more than one candidate expressing an interest, then we would propose that those candidates be given an opportunity to speak today, and that the election take place at the next council meeting.
And has anyone officially put their name forward or wish to put their name forward for the position? Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Warden. I would like to put my name forward for the position of Deputy Warden.
Thank you. We know you have some experience in that regard. Is there anyone else who wishes to put their name forward? Well, it sounds like you're it, Councillor Burton. We thank you for your interest in assisting in that regard. Do we have a resolution?
We do. And then I believe the deputy clerk circulated the declaration of office as well. So if we could do the motion first and then have Councillor Burton read the declaration.
Could I have a mover and a seconder to appoint Councillor Burton to the position of deputy warden? Councillors Ryall and Kennedy.
Moved by Councillor Ryle, seconded by Councillor Kennedy. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council confirms the acclamation of Councillor Dave Burton to the position of Deputy Warden for the Corporation of the County of Haliburton effective January 26, 2022 until November 14th, 2022.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you.
And then the declaration.
I was looking forward to my 10-minute speech.
I bet.
But Warden, I'd just like to say that I'm looking forward to the challenges we have this year. We have several, and I'm looking forward to working with you with them. And I'll certainly be ready to act or help when called upon. So that's my 10-minute speech, Mike.
Well done. Thank you.
I, David Burton, having been acclaimed to the office of Deputy Warden of the Council of the Corporation of the County of Haliburton, do solemnly promise and declare that I will truly, faithfully, and impartially exercise the office to the best of my knowledge and ability. I have not received and will not receive any payment or reward or promise thereof for the exercise of this office in a biased, corrupt, or in any other improper manner. I will disclose any pecuniary interest, direct or indirect, in accordance with the Municipal Conflict Interest Act. I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and I make this solemn promise and declaration conscientiously believing it to be true and knowing that the same force and effect is made under oath.
Thank you, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, it's now that concludes the end of our open session. So if I could have a mover and a seconder to go into closed. Councillors Roberts and DeBolen.
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor DeVolen. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council enter into closed session for the following reasons: personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, and labor relations or employee negotiations.
All in favor? That's carried in just a couple of minutes while we switch over.
And we're back live, Warden Danielson.
Thank you. So first is the bylaw to authorize the borrowing to meet current expenditures. Could I have a mover and a seconder for that bylaw? Councillor DeVolen and Ryle.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Ryle. Be it resolved that bylaw 4086, being a bylaw to authorize the borrowing of money to meet current expenditures of the corporation of the county of Haliburton, be considered to be read a first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? It's carried. Next is the bylaw to establish rates of remuneration for council. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Roberts and Shell.
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Shell. Be it resolved that bylaw 4087, being a bylaw to establish the rates of remuneration for members of council, be considered to be read a first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? That's carried. Is there any notice of motions? Are there any notice of motions? Hearing none, could I have a mover and a seconder for the confirming bylaw? Councillors Moffat and Burton.
Moved by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor Burton. Be it resolved that bylaw 4088, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the January 26, 2022 meeting of Haliburton County Council, be considered to be read a first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? That's carried. And lastly, could I have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Kennedy and Councillor Ryle.
Moved by Councillor Kennedy, seconded by Councillor Ryle. Be it resolved that the January 26, 2022 meeting of Haliburton County Council be adjourned.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. And we will see you all this afternoon, 1 o'clock.
See you then.
See you then.